It's a deeply dark, disturbing story of quasi-incest and the poetic, cannibalistic cycle of nature and human relationships. Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Get that coffee if you got it. Delicious. Today is Suddenly Last Summer by the American author and playwright Tennessee Williams, published in 1958, premiered on Broadway the same year as well. This beautiful edition features a 25-year-old Elizabeth Taylor on the cover, from the film adaptation, which I just finished last night, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz. And she's terrific in it, Taylor. Also starring Katharine Hepburn, who gives a stunning performance as Aunt Vi. Ugh. This is the first play I've read from Tennessee Williams. He's a household name here in America. I'm sure you've probably read or seen something by him. The Glass Menagerie, A Streetcar Named Desire, Cat and Hot Tin Roof, Night of the Iguana. He wasn't from Tennessee originally, actually, but from the othermost misspelled state in America, Mississippi. Williams' family was from Tennessee originally on his father's side, so that's where he took the name. The screenplay for the film was adapted by Tennessee himself and Gore Vidal, who was a friend of his. Gore seems to have added a few good lines of his own that I noticed were not in the book. And it creates an interesting role reversal by the end of the film that may have only been hinted at in the play. There's also more of a focus on the horrific, tragic fate of the mental institution's patients and the constant threat of Catherine joining them. Montgomery Clift plays the doctor. An underwhelming performance in my opinion, nothing against him. I think this was post-car crash too. He had this notorious car crash after falling asleep at the wheel, driving home from Elizabeth Taylor's house and crashing into a telephone pole, I think. I think that's what happened. And I think this was, so this was his first film after that, so not sure. But anyways, he was okay. I wrote that before I knew about the car crash, so I don't want to sound rude or anything. I haven't seen any of his earlier work. I was just like, eh. But I did have somebody in mind to play the doctor, of course, and it would be Richard Burton, right? Of course. Who, years later, actually gave a performance, in my opinion, a phenomenal performance as a Dr. Dysart in the film adaptation of Peter Shaffer's play Equus, a play with very similar themes. I highly recommend it if you enjoy this one. Or I highly recommend this if you enjoyed Equus, which I have reviewed before. And it's one of the few plays I've reviewed, and I'm a big fan of it. I think Peter Shaffer was actually the brother of the fellow who directed or wrote or directed The Wicker Man, the original one with Christopher Lee in '73, I think. The Shaffers. They had some interesting work between them, the Shaffer brothers. So yeah, this is the first one of his that I've read, but I saw and loved Night of the Iguana with Richard Burton and Ava Gardner, a film based on a play by Williams. And that's interesting because the last play I reviewed last year was Hamlet by Shakespeare. And I watched the performance on YouTube with Richard Burton to kind of get the whole thing, get the whole experience. And Taylor was also in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which I did see and enjoyed. She seems to be a frequent choice for Tennessee adaptations. For good reason. She's an exceptional actress. She's one of the best who's ever lived, probably along with Katharine Hepburn. So this film is quite a, anyways. But, the play is better than the film. I mean, and it's a great film. So what does that say? It means this play is phenomenal. It's completely outrageous. I mean, there is nothing like it. This is a hell of a thing. Suddenly Last Summer was written in 1957 and premiered on Broadway in 1958. It's actually inspired by a Greek tragedy called the Bacchae by the Greek tragedian Euripides, which I've not read but will certainly review in the future. The character in this book, Sebastian, who is already dead by the time it starts, will draw parallels to King Pentheus, who in the end of the Bacchae is dismembered and literally torn apart by women, including his mother. So, lovers of Freud and psychoanalysis will have a fucking field day with this play. It starts off in a Victorian mansion in the Garden District of New Orleans, with a description of the deceased young poet Sebastian's garden, as though we were in a savage jungle, somewhere deep in untamed territory. Very Conrad, right? The intro of this short, strange, very dark, and very powerful play features descriptions reminiscent of the carnivorous, sexually deviant plants found in Huysmans Against Nature. Just read it and you'll see what I mean. Very decadent, right? Very French decadent novel. There's tons of violent, esurient sexual symbolism in here. Drenched in it, right? It's a psychoanalyst wet hot fever dream. Definitely. It's no wonder this play is a favorite of Camille Paglia's, which is where I got the recommendation in the first place. And it's possible she got the recommendation from her mentor, Harold Bloom, who holds this play in high regard. So the story opens in New Orleans, where we're introduced to a woman named Violet Venable, an older woman with a kind of Norma Desmond-like crabbiness, extremely wealthy and immeasurably bitter over the death of her son, the poet Sebastian, who died mysteriously in Spain suddenly last summer, while he was vacationing with his cousin Catherine in a place in Spain called Cabeza de Lobo, Wolf's Head in English. Not a real place, to the best of my knowledge. I think it's based on Mallorca or Ibiza, but I'm not sure. So the play opens with a visit from a doctor. Violet believes that Catherine is somehow responsible for the death of Sebastian. So, using her money, she's pulling all the strings, so to speak. So now she's in prison in this mental hospital run by nuns, one of whom is supervising her while she's out. When the sister attempts to force Catherine not to smoke and hand over a cigarette, eventually Catherine does, except she hands it over to the nun's hand with the lit end first. They don't get along, and it's no wonder. So, Catherine is basically imprisoned by Aunt Vi. Aunt Vi wants the doctor to perform a lobotomy on Catherine to keep her quiet, for multiple reasons. She's trying to bribe the doctor with a generous donation if he'll do it. But the doctor can clearly see that Catherine is not insane, but she has repressed the death of Sebastian, so she's not able to recall it. And so his last-ditch effort, basically, to not have to go through this, it seems, is to give her this truth serum and have everybody gather around and hear the story of what really happened to Sebastian that day, suddenly last summer. Sebastian and his mother were very close, but and they would travel all the time to various exotic locations, and but Violet had a stroke, and so instead of taking her on the trip to Spain, he invited Catherine, which was a huge blow. It was a very large slight to his mother, and she took it quite personally. Now, Catherine has described how Sebastian died. She was there, she saw it, but the impression you get throughout the entire play leading up to the climax, wherein it's revealed how he did die, is that it was so outrageous, it was so unbelievable that Violet is accusing her of lying, Part of the story comes from a real-life tragedy. Tennessee himself had a sister who was very close to him, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia and underwent a lobotomy herself. Very sad story. So Violet hates Catherine. She hates her. First, because she stole her poet's son away from him. Second, because she's threatening to publicly reveal the truth about her son. He was gay. And he used Catherine and his own mother to attract boys for him. Though, of course, she's in complete denial about this. And that's not the only thing she doesn't want Catherine to reveal. Sebastian died in an absolutely horrific manner, which has traumatized Catherine to the point where she can't exactly recall what happened. Hence the truth serum, right? And Aunt Violet doesn't want this to get out. She says he had a heart attack and that's that. And also, I should mention, on top of all of this, you have Catherine's bumbling simpleton mother and brother making a mess of things by pressuring her to get the lobotomy so they can get the money from Sebastian's will, which is held up in probate by Aunt Vi. And if Aunt Vi doesn't get what she wants, then it'll be in probate indefinitely and they'll never see the money. Because she has her lawyers and they can't afford lawyers to contest it, and it's a mess. So, eventually, they all sit down. Catherine is injected with the truth serum and she tells all, as she is able to remember how Sebastian died in gruesome detail. It's a deeply dark, disturbing story of quasi-incest and the poetic, cannibalistic cycle of nature and human relationships. It's one hell of a book. Tennessee Williams spent time in many different beautiful cities, right? He was a real traveler, New Orleans included, but was also a resident of Key West, Florida, which we just got back from, along with Ernest Hemingway. Much longer than Hemingway, in fact, I learned. Hemingway was only there for approximately 6 years or so, and Williams was there for over 30 years or something. They actually met, only once though. Ironically, it wasn't in Key West, it was actually over in Cuba at Hemingway's house over there. It sounded like an amicable, if uneventful meeting. I think it was post-plane crashes for Hemingway, so he wasn't really doing so well. He was kind of in the twilight of his life leading up to his suicide. Dark days for him, undoubtedly. But they did meet, so I thought that was interesting. One thing you realize about Florida in general, after living here for a while, you're surrounded by very extreme examples of nature, of the natural world, all the time. Storms, wildlife. Just yesterday we were on our walk and we were racing with a wild dolphin, in the water next to us. It was crazy. I have the footage to prove it. It's nuts. I mean, this kind of stuff happens all the time. There's manatees, there's turtles, there's rays, birds of all variety. Just a week ago, we had an extremely powerful looking peregrine in our front yard, right? This just happened we wake up and we just look out our window and this is what's going on. It was in our front yard, killing another bird, a young one, to the screeching dismay of all the others, of course. You've never seen a creature more majestic, right? And one more indifferent to cruelty, more indifferent to suffering. This bird just had its chest puffed out, right? And all of these blue jays are just screaming and flying all around it and screaming at it. And this bird is not moving. He just doesn't budge. He's entirely intent on getting his food, which happens to be this poor bird underneath his talons. But, and when he flies away, when he gets up and after the bird stops moving, all the other birds follow him, and this whole scene, this whole feeder set just vanishes off, and it's just unbelievable. It's so extreme, there's so much drama happening all around you. So while Florida, and in particular Key West, is very, very beautiful, it's an extremely dramatic tropical setting, right? And this would have certainly inspired Tennessee, who seemed to have appreciated these environments. The sweltering heat and the merciless, cruel, natural brutality and the ever-increasing tension, right? Those are the elements that most stand out for me in Suddenly Last Summer. And then there's Aunt Vi's monologue about Sebastian and her going on the trip after he read Melville, and they go to the Encantadas, like the Galapagos Islands, and they see the sea turtles. They see the whole process of the sea turtles hatching and racing for the sea and being mercilessly devoured by seagulls. And later there's the brilliant line from Catherine in the book, and this stood out the minute I read it. Okay, so Catherine and the doctor are talking to one another. Catherine is telling the doctor about the stroke she had, that Aunt Vi had, the stroke Aunt Vi had, that is. She had a slight stroke in April. It just affected one side, the left side of her face, but it was disfiguring, and after that, Sebastian couldn't use her. And the doctor says, "Use her? Did you say use her?" The sounds of the jungle garden are not loud but ominous. Yes, we all use each other, and that's what we think of as love. And not being able to use each other is what's hate. It's a powerful line. See, that's the whole theme of the play, right? Ultimately, the play is not a plead for a better world. It's a cry of horror at the way things are. How they were, how they are, and how they shall continue to be. It's a cry of horror at nature and life itself, at God, if you will, at God's creation, right? Sometimes it's almost misanthropic, in a beautiful way, not in a cynical or a callous way, but in a sincere way, like the horror of nature, the horror of people and the relationships and what they do to each other and how they feed upon each other and how they take things from each other, and they just take and take and take, and they suck them dry until they're like a praying mantis, right? Like when she sucks out the life of her lover, right? The female sucks out the life of the male, literally sucks him dry, and then you just shove the carcass off or whatever. Several insects or arachnids who do this kind of thing. Anyways, Tennessee was able to see this in people, People use people, they feed off them, they feed off all of their essence or their assets or whatever, and then they're discarded, right? These are the movements of nature, of which we're very much a part of, in all different sorts of ways. I mean, you can think of, the inheritance from the mother and her brother. You can think of it as Sebastian and the boys, and using his mother and his cousin for getting them. You can also see it in the boys and what they do to Sebastian. Explicitly, perhaps most explicitly in the whole book. But was Sebastian not a devourer of boys and people as well? He used them, and when he couldn't, he discarded them, threw them away, including his mother. Very manipulative, very selfish, very self-serving. He's kind of an effeminate, sadistic, self-serving aesthete. I think I've kind of spoiled it, but, hopefully not too much. Better than food. Yeah. With a grain of salt. Wait, that's still a pun. I can't get rid of this. It won't stop. It's all a pun on cannibalism. I can't stop. Oof. So you should read it. I think anybody who enjoys Southern Gothic literature and the work of Yukio Mishima, also a gay playwright, and as it turns out, a friend and influence of Tennessee Williams, and vice versa, you know. Apparently one Saturday night in 1957 in Manhattan, Tennessee Williams was throwing a party at his apartment, and he picked up Yukio Mishima off the street, who was visiting, must have been visiting, and the two became friends. Tennessee Williams didn't even know who he was at the time, and the two became friends, and they influenced each other's work, and eventually they shared an agent and a publisher, and I was like, whoa, really? Like, this is way closer of a connection than I thought. I just thought, you know, the story was like, wow, this really feels like, you know, a Yukio Mishima story. But no, yeah, it's like, those two guys seemed like they were destined to be friends. I did not expect to read about that. That's crazy. Small world. This is an extremely Mishima story in every way. The martyred Saint Sebastian, who is also a poet, you know, devoured by the young boys he exploited, perhaps. Saint Sebastian is an iconic symbol for gay men. I don't know exactly why or when that came to be, but he is. Mishima himself posed as Saint Sebastian in various photos taken like approximately a decade later. Extremely homoerotic photos. Shot with arrows, right, bleeding, and then killed himself by cutting his stomach open a few years later. Interestingly enough, I was informed by my wife that he was actually not killed by the arrows. No, he was actually saved after being shot with all the arrows. He's famously depicted as having arrows shot into him, but he actually survived that apparently. And then after that, I'm sorry to laugh, it's terrible, but he was beaten to death with cudgels and thrown into the public sewer. Not unlike Heliogabalus, actually. I think he was thrown down the well into the sewer with his mother after he was murdered at 16 or whatever. I mean, after he was the crazy, corrupt Roman emperor and wanted to become a woman, all this. Anyways, so yeah, there's just tons of material here. I could go on forever. It's a crazy story. I mean, it's completely outrageous. But if any of that sounded interesting to you, I think it's going to be right up your alley. And yeah, again, also if you enjoyed Equus by Peter Schaffer, similar themes here. God, madness, sacrifice, murder, very dark, very pagan, over the top, but irresistible, right? Beautifully done. Coffee time. For those of you who are new, thank you very much for stopping by and watching. I take all the names of the patrons on Patreon who have donated $5 more per video to the show. I place their names in this mason jar, and for every review I do, I pull out a name, and whoever's name I pull out, I send them a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. And the coffee is delicious. Currently it's from Sumatra. Very dark, very strong, muy fuerte. If you'd like to help support the show and get in on that, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. You can click on the link below in the description or go to patreon.com/books-are-better-than-food and donate $5 or more per video, and I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you. And for donating $1 or more, you'll get access to all the cool stuff listed below. Really appreciate it again. Thank you. Also, if you would like to support the show by buying one of these mugs, the link is below, and you can also get one of these bookmarks. It's just my name on the front there with a little reminder, and I'm happy to sign them back or something, whatever you like. You can hit me up via the email below or on Instagram. Thank you very much to all the patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Stephen C. Thank you very much, Stephen. Really appreciate it. You shall be receiving Suddenly Last Summer and Other Plays by Tennessee Williams, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly, and I hope you love both. Cheers. Well, that's all I've got for you today. Please subscribe if you have not already, and hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and always remember, bring a book wherever you go. All right, thank you very much for watching. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night. Talk to you soon. Ciao.